welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Kinane. Coming up, Craig Thompson under more pressure, this time from his own union. MPs report back to Parliament on gay marriage and why the finance industry rewards failure. Our panel tonight, lawyer and political commentator Greg O'Mahony, Greg Jericho, who blogs under the name Grog's Gamut, and Jessica Brown from the Centre for Independent Studies. And you can join in on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum. There's more pressure on federal Labor MP Craig Thompson tonight, and this time it's coming from his own side of politics. AAP is reporting that Cathy Jackson, his successor as National Secretary of the Health Services Union, wants Mr Thompson to go on the public record and explain financial irregularities it found after he left. The member for Dobell has repeatedly denied claims he used his work credit card to pay for prostitutes. The allegations are already being investigated by Fair Work Australia. Now the union has decided to refer the matter to New South Wales Police.
In these circumstances and based on the new material that has come to light in recent weeks, and to remove any suggested impediment to the investigation of the New South Wales Police, the National Executive has today resolved to refer the matter to the New South Wales Police and cooperate with any subsequent investigation.
And the opposition stepped up its attack during question time. Tony Abbott called for a suspension of standing orders so the Prime Minister could make a statement to Parliament about Labor's decision to loan Mr Thompson money.
Mr Speaker, as long as members of this government are stonewalling and obfuscating, as long as they are defending the indefensible and justifying the unjustifiable to protect their own position in government, they won't be properly protecting the interests of the Australian people, and this is why standing orders must be suspended.
What hypocrites! What hypocrites we see from those opposite. There is no process. There is no convention, there is no tradition, there is no norm that this Leader of the Opposition will not trash. This man is not a Conservative, he is a reactionary.
The opposition motion failed and question time was brought to a halt after just one question. Greg O'Mahony, how significant is the Health Service Union's referral to the New South Wales Police on this issue? Does that mean there's more chance of the police building an investigation around this issue?
I think, Steve, it's a lot more interesting politically than it is legally. We saw the other day Senator Brandis refer the matter to the police. This is just that again. And as the police said the other day, they've reiterated it today. The normal investigation processes apply and the police will investigate this to see if there has been a criminal offence. So whilst it's good to see our politicians sort of debating the big issues of the day in a really relaxed and controlled fashion, I think in the scheme of things it doesn't really move the needle.
Jess, what do you make of these developments today?
Look, I don't think she had much of a choice, and I think Cathy Jackson, the General Secretary of the HSU, said it herself. She's got to answer to her members and she's got to explain what is going on here. As she said, someone has misused a credit card, now they've got to work out who it is, and really their obligation is to their members, not to the ALP, to their members, and I think she had no choice, really. And
Greg, Cathy Jackson stressed that point about the obligation not being to the party, yet she is a party member. She is on the she's a state and national conference delegate for the Labor Party in Victoria, and she's on the Victorian ALP's administrative committee, so it's a pretty gutsy move by Cathy Jackson.
Yeah, she's going to have a fun little time come the National Convention later on in the year when she presumably meets Craig Thompson in the corridors if he's still around. But I think it's absolutely right. It's got to the point where I think the HSU is, I would suggest, copying a fair bit of heat from its own members and has weighed up the politics and sees that there's a lot more in their interest to, I guess, distance themselves from Thompson than to be the loyal Labor Party.
And what did you make of the tactics by the opposition today to basically close down question time?
Well, it was a new one. Bugger this waiting and build up some momentum. It was, what, 2:06 and straight into it. So it seems that Tony Abbott has even discarded his tactic of waiting till 10 minutes before play school starts, and so they were just straight into it. But it was odd because the actual motion that they moved really was quite narrow and was focused purely on getting Julia Gillard to essentially say what her office had to do with the New South Wales paying for Thompson's legal fees. And it was fairly narrow, but Tony Abbott and Christopher Pyne went to great lengths and drew fairly long bows to try and suggest that this whole thing was causing the government to be in this great paralysis and wasn't able to do anything, which is this odd thing of them saying we need to stop everything because your government is not doing anything. It was this bizarre sort of logic that they were trying to put forward.
I mean, I think the opposition's contributing to the paralysis. They keep saying we should be focused on bigger issues. There's so much to deal with here. We're just focused on the minutiae. But it's, you know, it is that issue that the opposition's talking about ad nauseam.
Well, the Labor Party needs to find a solution to this, and former Labor power broker Graham Richardson's come up with a solution. Jess, he said this afternoon he thought that Craig Thompson should resign from the ALP and sit as an independent until the next election. What do you make of that suggestion?
It's pretty bold. I think only Richo could come up with something like that. Look, in a way, it shows just where we've got to with this parliament, which is so tight. And as you said, it's just so much about these little nitpicking issues. I think it sort of shows this is what we're going to get in this type of parliament. But yeah, I'll be interested to see if that happens. It's a pretty bold move, and I think it is. I think it'd be pulling the wool over the electorate's eyes in a way. I don't think it's particularly honest.
Well, earlier today, a motion calling for Craig Thompson to make a statement to the House of Reps was defeated. The opposition needed an absolute majority to win the vote. That didn't happen, but independent Andrew Wilkie did lend his support. He's in favour of the member for the bill, giving his side of the story to Parliament, but he also believes he should be allowed to keep his seat.
I think, this is a highly charged affair now. I think it's better for both the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, for that matter, and the people he commands, to just back off and say something like, these are very serious allegations. We must let the inquiries run their course, and in the interim, let the member go about his business. And frankly, I think he should have stayed on as the chair of the committee. He's either fit to sit in the Parliament or he's not. You can't be half fit to sit in the Parliament.
Jess, should Craig Thompson make a statement to Parliament, do you think?
Yeah, I actually think he should. Look, I know he hasn't been charged with anything at this stage, but these are pretty serious allegations. And as we've all discussed, it is really holding up the process. I think he should make a statement and draw a clear line in the sand and move on. I also think perhaps the Prime Minister should make a statement as to why she's so unequivocal in her support for him.
Greg Jericho, what do you think?
You're right. I think Julia Gillard's unequivocal confidence is, as often Julia Gillard does, I think she overreaches, I think, and goes that further than she actually needs to. In fact, I think she...
Unlike
she
her
could
predecessor.
Absolutely. She could have just played it down and has confidence instead. It's the full confidence. Yeah. It's overwhelming confidence. She's more confident in him than anything. But the problem with getting, or forcing, as the Liberal Party are trying to make Craig Thompson make a statement, is you still can't force him to say what you want him to say. The motion that they opened Parliament with this morning, that Wilkie voted for, it was to give him 10 minutes to explain himself. Well, he would have probably got up, said that these things are being investigated. He is fully confident that he will be exonerated, and would it actually achieve anything? That's the point. It's a case of we're just going to waste Parliament's time more with this. How about we just let it run its course, see what happens? If he gets charged, well, that perhaps forces the issue a little bit more. But until then, we're just dealing with some fairly interesting evidence that's getting reported in the newspapers, like him making lots of phone calls at night, 11, 12 p.m, then 11, 13 p.m, and 12:05 p.m, or presumably he's someone using his mobile phone.
Greg O'Mahony, what's your position on this? Should he make a statement to the Parliament?
I think he probably should. He's the one person in a position to explain some of the conduct and some of the questions that have been asked, and he probably should do that. Equally, I completely agree with what was just said about the Prime Minister's response. When she talks about this guy, you'd think she was talking about Nelson Mandela, and she's... Yeah. I think she probably needs to tone down the rhetoric a little bit and just keep a lid on it.
OK, well, the Coalition's pursuit of Craig Thompson even stopped MPs from attending the funeral of Margaret Olley. Arts Minister Simon Crean and the artist's friend Malcolm Turnbull had been excused from Parliament to pay their respects in Sydney. But the opposition decided to withdraw the offer of a paired vote because it needed everyone it could muster for the motion calling on Craig Thompson to address the House.
While Margaret Olley is a very significant Australian and one for which the opposition has the utmost respect, and I'd point out she was a self-declared Liberal supporter throughout her life, it is not appropriate for a funeral to take precedence over votes in the Parliament about the integrity of the government.
Meanwhile, Labor accused the coalition of grubby tactics.
Some things are above politics, and memorial services are above politics. We should have been at that service today.
We can argue about standing orders, we can argue about what the rules are. This is about common decency.
Greg Jericho, did the coalition overstep the mark on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is pretty pathetic, really. I mean, it's not like they were wanting to nip down to Manuka for lunch or to even go off to a Labor Party do. This was a state memorial service for someone who was viewed as worthy enough to get an AC, was recognised as a national treasure almost. If the Minister for Arts can't go along and represent the Australian people at such an occasion, then what's the point of having such occasions?
But could he have gone anyway? I mean, if the coalition required an absolute majority, he probably still could have gone.
True, he could have. But it's a case of, I think, if he could have gone, then why are they even bringing up the issue of withdrawing the pairing agreement, which had been agreed and was apparently rescinded last night. And it draws into question, why did they even bother doing this? You know, they only got 73 votes as it was. Without Simon Crean there still would have only been 73 votes for the Liberal Party. What was the purpose being served by this?
I think it's not just the significance of Margaret Olley and the importance of the government being as present at that funeral as they could have been. It's also the issue of what did they stay in Canberra for? And it wasn't a wartime debate. It wasn't a debate about a fiscal stimulus package that was dividing the House of Parliament. It was a completely nothing day in the history of Australian Parliament. And I think it's incredibly unfortunate. How could you argue with what Minister Crean just said? There are some things that are above politics. You'd hope on a day like this, decency and commemorating a great Australian would be one of those things.
Jess?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, but we're all going to be in wild agreement, I think, because, look, I just think it's a bit petty, and I think Australians expect that their politicians are going to go to Canberra and try and run the country and try and have a constructive, civilised debate, and that's not what's happening. It's petty.
And it looks like Pez won't be granted at all during the carbon tax debate.
No, it seems like that's completely gone. Tony Abbott said even if it's your your daughter's 21st birthday, you can't go. I'm not sure who would be having a 21st birthday.
Because I think previously when Tanya Plibersek was about to give birth, they granted her a pair, but it seems like that's all thrown out the window.
So I'm not sure. They're still granting a pair for Kevin Rudd at the moment. Presumably, if you were in hospital, you would hope that some standards could be maintained, but although I must say at this point I don't know if there are. It's got to the point where they're seeking any advantage, no matter how low.
I think, unfortunately, it reminds me a little bit of the way that the debate's gone in America over the debt ceiling. This idea that everyone is governing for the same end. Now, people on different sides of the House might have different ideas about how to get there, but ultimately everyone wants the country to run smoothly. That idea seems to have gone out the window, and partisanship is more important, and I think that's a real shame.
Well, we were talking about the kinder, gentler polity not that long ago. This is dirtier than I can ever remember.
Less than a year ago, I think. It hasn't even survived the anniversary.
I think that's right. I think Tony Abbott said over Christmas his New Year's resolution was to be more constructive, more positive and more upbeat.
Was that the new paradigm?
Yeah. So, to ban 21st birthdays. I mean, I can't imagine there are too many people shifting, dates from 3 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, but it's a bit rich.
I wonder if the factor was Margaret Olley, an artist who, admittedly, while she's well known within the art world, is not well known in the community. I wonder if there is something in that Tony Abbott thought he could test out on that. I mean, if it was, for example, a test cricketer? A test cricketer or a tennis player, would he be saying, John Alexander, sorry, you can't go and, be a pallbearer at a funeral? I think, whereas with this one, he probably thought, oh, well, there's not many votes to lose in the arts.
Well, still on federal politics, and federal MPs have started reporting back to Parliament today on what voters in their electorates think about same-sex marriage. MPs of all political persuasions took to the floor.
Many constituents told me their children were bullied and belittled because they were same-sex attracted. Some were even driven to suicide. I cannot sit idly by while the nation is complicit in this harm.
The definition of marriage is the only argument that we have against polygamy. If we would open the door to same-sex marriage, no valid argument remains against polygamy or the multiple other type of unions that could be out there, because the term marriage becomes meaningless.
Greens MP Adam Bant was the man behind the move.
And we're not just doing this for the people who want to get married. Parliament has a great opportunity to send a message out to the boy in a country town who is working out who he's attracted to, or the girl at high school who wants to take her girlfriend to the school formal, that Parliament and the highest body in the land believes that your love is equal.
A petition signed by 52,000 Australians in favour of marriage between a man and a woman was also tabled in Parliament today. Tasmanian Labor Senator Helen Polley was among the MPs lending their support to that.
Support is to retain the definition of marriage as it stands. The Prime Minister has made her position very clear, the government's position is very clear, and so I'm very proud to be part of this tabling of these important petitions to the Senate today. I think it reinforces that the overwhelming majority still believe in the definition of marriage as it is stated today.
Greg Jericho, you followed a bit of this debate today, and a lot of it was about almost MPs polling their electorates, wasn't it?
I don't know if it was if the debate would have been more distressing for advocates of gay marriage or for pollsters, because given national polling on the issue generally comes in around 60 to 65% in favour, yet some of the MPs were reporting back that they were having absolute landslides against the issue. My favourite was ALP member from Deakin, Mike Simon, who once he removed apparently lobbyists and unverified emails, I think anything that was a Gmail account got kicked out, he was able to report that only 6.02% of his constituents were for same-sex marriage, which is a pretty accurate polling that I think even Nielsen or Newspoll would be happy with. But
now, Greg, you said most polls are saying 60 to 65%. Is that true? Is it that high in support?
Well, there was one in, I'm not sure how recent, but I know Galaxy poll in 2009, which is starting to get back a couple of years now, that came in at 62%. And it was interesting in that when you broke down all the demographics, every demographics, regardless of whether it was income, whether it was urban or rural, they all had a majority in favour except for one demographic, which was 50 plus. And even there it was 51% in favour and I think 51% against and 46% in favour. So we're not talking, even in that sector of the community, massive, I guess, opposition to it.
Jess, Adam Band, the man behind this this whole process in the first place, said today he thought it was another step towards full equality. But of the 30 MPs who took part in the debate, only 5 said they would like same-sex couples to be allowed to marry. So is it a step in favour of the Greens or not?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure, to be honest, and it's really difficult to get a reading on this. I mean, I think the polling of electorates is a bit of a publicity stunt. More than anything. And there is a real danger for the same-sex lobby that, and this is with any kind of public policy, that if they try and push too far ahead of public opinion, it risks a bit of a backlash and putting it back further than they were in the first place. So I think that's a danger. I mean, I think that probably the way to go here is a conscience vote, because it seems to come down really not on party lines. It seems to come down on people's personal opinions. It's something that I'm in favour of, but I think I would go for a conscience vote.
Greg, how's this contributed to the debate on the issue, do you think?
Well, I'm always very wary about talking about opinion polls and popularity in respect of basic rights. I think just after the Mabo decision, there was a poll that came out that showed, I think 75% of Australians were against recognising land rights for Aborigines. And the bottom line is human rights isn't about popularity. They're often innately unpopular. And I think it's incredibly unfortunate that some of the views are being expressed in the context of a country where large tracts of the nation, not necessarily the major cities, are quite intolerant towards gay people. I think some of the language attending this debate is incredibly unfortunate. I also think this is a very troubling issue for Julia Gillard. When you hear Julia speak on this issue, and I'm thinking specifically of a speech she gave at the Rooty Hill RSL last year, you get the impression every ounce of her believes in recognising gay marriage, but she can't take that position because of her party. And I think that's a perception that's plagued her on a lot of issues. There's this sense that whether it's on climate change, whether it's the mining tax, whether it's on refugees, you can't tell me that Julia Gillard is a fan of sending kids to Malaysia unattended. And there's this perception that a lot of what she talks about she doesn't believe in. And I think this is another example of that.
Yeah,
Greg, is that the way you see it?
It's another example of, as I was saying before, of her going further than she needed to. I mean, she can say that, she believes that marriage is between a man and a woman, and whether or not we believe her, that's another thing. But it's that overarching sense of this is the way it must be and this is the way it will always be, and it's put herself in just in a corner. So if we go to the national conference of the ALP at the end of the year, if they amazingly vote in favour of changing the policy and allowing either a conscience vote or that the Labor Party becomes in favour of gay marriage, then where does that leave her? It almost looks like she's been undermined, whereas she could have just taken you know, I've always believed this traditionally, but I'm open to, you know, any discussion on it. Whereas it was this case of no discussion, this is my view.
And this is what's characterised this government right from the beginning, right back to Kevin Rudd, their jumpiness, that they are so quick to jump onto these things and, as you said, go too far, that no one knows what they stand for. And this will be the fundamental thing, I think, that brings the government down. It's not all of these policy failures, it's not the pink bats, it's not the incompetence of which there is, there is a lot. It is this sense that no one knows what they stand for because they're so jumpy.
Well, it's almost more a case that they still, I think, are continually worrying about John Howard coming out of the political grave, and they think we better counter whatever he would have countered instead of saying, right, we're in government. When you change the party, you change, or change the government, you change the country. Let's try and change the country a little bit. Instead, they're like, well, we're still not sure what we want to do. And I think you're right. There is that, you know.
Well, moving on to another issue now, and the contentious issue of whether the private health insurance rebate should be means-tested is back on the national agenda. The lower house of Parliament will debate government legislation tomorrow aimed at phasing out the subsidy for individuals earning more than $80,000 and families on more than $160,000. Deputy Opposition Leader Julie Bishop says the move would penalise people who choose private health insurance.
All Australians deserve access to affordable health care and choice in health care. Private health insurance takes the pressure off the public health system. The government's proposed cuts to the private health insurance rebate will force people into the state government hospital system.
And Health Fund HBF took its fight against the plan to Canberra today with a petition of almost 55,000 signatures. Jess, what do you make of this idea? Is this another area of middle-class welfare that needs reform?
Yeah, I think it is. I think they should cut it. But I suppose my caveat to that is that I would much rather see that it goes into tax cuts rather than more spending. Having said that, I do think that the government does need to reaffirm the importance of the private health care industry. I don't think means testing this is going to undermine private health insurance.
What about the argument, though, it could put more pressure on the public hospital system?
I think from the figures that I've seen, it's not likely to do that. I think what's much more important is the lifetime cover rules, and so they definitely need to keep those penalties in place to make sure that people do keep their private health insurance. But we do need to reaffirm the importance of it. I mean, as the population ages, we are going to have to move to more of a user-pay system in health. There's no doubt about that.
Greg Jericho?
Well, I think if there's one thing that you can be guaranteed is that if private health insurance companies say that health rebates will go up, they will go up because they've always gone up, even when they brought in the lifetime health cover and we had all those wonderful ads with umbrellas saying if we all get under it, we'll keep the prices down. And, of course, they just keep going up. But this is obvious middle-class welfare, that wonderful term. And I think if the Liberal Party really want to start finding $70 billion worth of cuts, I think this is a fairly easy one to get in.
Greg O'Mahony, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think I disagree. I think it's about the lesser of two evils here, and I completely understand the middle-class welfare argument, and I think we're headed towards another ugly debate about what is middle class, who feels middle class, and at what price point can you say you're middle class. But I think equally, some studies I've seen in Europe suggest that you really have to do everything you can to encourage people of all sort of income brackets to take up private insurance, to take pressure off the public sector. And I think in Australia we have to think big picture and long term about this, and we are an ageing population, and I think we need to do everything we can to protect the already under siege public system as much as possible.
All right, coming up next on The Drum, how extreme money and the cult of risk has led the current global market woes. We're going to talk to financial commentator and author Suchajit Das. That's next.
Every day now, Principal Saito takes a Geiger counter out into the playground to take radiation readings. The contamination level has fallen since the soil was removed. But near the play equipment, it's nearly off the scale. But most parents here simply don't have the money or the means to pack up their families and leave.
Mitt Romney might be the front runner, but there are others who are racing to try and topple him from that position. God bless America! We love you!
Others were disappointed the candidate they wanted wasn't on the ballot.
She's coming. Get ready.
The 4,000 cattle on board this ship will be unloaded over the next 12 hours or so, and they'll be taking the first steps down a very long road to the recovery of the live export trade. The exporter, Austrex, wouldn't be interviewed about their shipment, and at least one Australian today has tried to have us removed from the court.
Hello, I'm Siobhan Heaney. Join me for the Culture Quarter, where we go behind the scenes at the National Archives to explore the art and the science behind conservation.
There will always be loved objects, that really old book that means something special to somebody.
That's coming up on the Culture Quarter here on ABC News 24.
Our guest tonight on The Drum has been involved in financial markets for more than 30 years, working on the buy and the sell sides of the business. In his latest book, Extreme Money, Suchajit Das looks at how the cult of risk has come to dominate the world of finance, creating massive wealth for a few while endangering the jobs and futures of many workers. Welcome to The Drum.
Nice to be here.
Now, 30 years ago, professionals, finance professionals, were a very small part of the economy. They weren't paid that well, but suddenly now they're the masters of the universe, as you call them. What changed in those 30 years?
I'll tell you a good story. In the 1930s, when people were in banking during the Great Depression, and particularly after the stock market crash, they actually didn't admit to being bankers. One actually went home and told his mother that he played the piano in a brothel. And when I started in this business, I mean, stockbrokers were one step up for real estate agents, you know, and bankers. My first boss actually wore a cardigan and had slippers under his desk. So it's some way, and it's summed up by Anthony LaPaglia, who actually in the bank has this wonderful line where he says he's just like God, except in a better suit. And it changed because money became so central to the way our economies work. And it's very simple. Growth, everything about the economy started to be driven by financialization. And the extreme example of that is obviously the United States. Actually, it's worse than that. If you actually go to Iceland, where the banks at one stage were 10 times the size of what Iceland produced. I mean, they wanted to be Wall Street on the tundra, if you believe it or not. So they became central, and so the people in finance assumed a position of enormous importance in the way the world worked.
So what happened in the mid-1950s when this culture of the Uber bonus, as you put it in the book, suddenly came in? A culture which you argue creates a moral hazard. What changed?
Well, I think fundamentally where it started from was interesting. It started in investment banking. In investment banking, there used to be partnerships, you know. The old stories about Goldman Sachs where everybody got together and they sat in the same room and they had lunch together, they probably went to the toilet together, they did everything together. But the whole point was that this bunch of people had their own money at stake. But as the businesses grew, they started to get third-party money in, and then the whole golden shrine of the partnership. I mean, the joke used to be at Goldman Sachs that if you became a partner, you won the lottery. The only thing was you won it every year. So what happened was that was taken away. So you had to incentivize people, so these bonuses came in. But the thing was, they got paid well, but they didn't have as much skin in their game. And that's the big problem. And then what happened was this lovely process. Commercial banks got religion. And they said, oh, well, you know, look at these investment bankers. They're really smart and they make all this money. So we got to get into investment banking. So they bought these places. And then the commercial bankers said, hang on, hang on, hang on. We own these buggers. And they basically get paid more than we do. So we must be masters of the universe as well. So it was sort of this creeping process which went on to the point where people at Citigroup and so forth, where I used to work, which was a fairly staid commercial bank, very conservative generally, changed culture to the point in the mid-1990s I used to look around saying, is that the organisation I left 7 or 8 years ago? So
how has that bonus culture created a moral hazard?
Simple, because essentially what you have is a culture where heads you win, tails the other person loses. So basically what happens is the money that's in the game is somebody else's money, and if you actually make money with that money, you get a reasonably sizable cut. Hedge funds are a good example of that. The cut is about 20%. So you get that if you win. If you lose, well, it's not your money. It's somebody else taking the loss.
And back in 2008, when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, the New York office alone had set aside $2.5 billion in bonuses.
Absolutely.
Why is it that the market rewards them failing?
Well, I think the fundamental thing is bankers have this wonderful way of behaving. You know, they're all capitalists when things are going well. The moment that things turn around, they become socialists. And then they have this really, really nuclear weapon. They sort of lean across to the Treasury Secretary and go, you know, of course you know, if you let us go, what's going to happen? And he goes, no, what? He says, it'll be your pension, it'll be his pension, and they'll be rising the street. So, you know, wouldn't it be safe? It's like, yes, Minister, you know, wouldn't it be better to bail you out?
Now, you of course, work as a risk management consultant in the industry. Does that mean there's not much work in the industry for you?
Well, I've become a complete renegade. You know, I'm just the worst of the worst. Everybody looks at him and says, that man's dangerous. You know, that's just dangerous. You know, get him away. Strange thing is, my volume of work has never really changed. They sort of, it's like almost a sadomasochistic relationship. The worse I say...
So, they get you in and then they ignore you? Is that what happens?
They've ignored me forever, so that's nothing new. That's nothing new. But the fundamental thing is, I'm one of those people, I've got a lot of grey hair, I've been around for 30 years, and fortunately or unfortunately, I've tended to be right more often than I'm wrong when I've pointed these out. But in the meantime, for 4 or 5 years, they ignore you and they make all these horrible losses, and then they turn around and say, you know what? You were right. By that stage, you know, you're about $10 billion down the gurgle pipe. Doesn't matter. So you have this momentary fame, and they sort of listen to you a little bit. But after that, life goes on.
Can I ask, are you fighting against a brick wall? I mean, you look at the huge hedge fund insider trading case that we've seen in the US over the last few months. I've seen even bigger cases emerging in South Korea at the moment that might have wiped off $30 billion from the stock market there in 8 minutes. Is what Steve was referring to before, there's huge incentives. When people measure risk-reward, it's swaying them towards doing the wrong thing. And when a risk manager like yourself comes in and says, hold on, starts waving the red flag, you're competing against a hedge fund manager and standing between him and $60 million.
There's a wonderful guy, Raghuram Rajan, who's a professor at the University of Chicago, and he went to Citigroup. Poor man, he's an academic, has lived a very sheltered life. He turned up and he was trying to warn Citigroup about all the problems in the mortgage market. And somebody leant over, the risk manager at Citigroup, actually, who I know, leant over and said, you know, don't mention this. He said, why not? He said, everybody who's mentioned it so far has been fired. So basically, don't mention it. I don't want to be associated with this line of thinking. So you're absolutely correct. It's
like
a brick
working
wall.
for Kevin Rudd.
It's very, very true. You just can't basically do it because... And the other thing which the bankers are superb at, and you're involved in the political process, they're the best lobbyists I've ever seen. I mean, the amount of money that goes into from Wall Street into Washington, which the lobbying process... In fact, most of the... I love when Barney Frank and everybody comes up with the Dodd-Frank, which I actually call, frankly, a dud bill, basically. But the point is that bill was shaped, not really by Congress. It was shaped by the lobbyists and the people they represent. It was done there, and it was done in a way which actually had very little concrete effect on what they were trying to control. It's a really hard battle, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't wage it. And ultimately, probably, it'll be like the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, bankers came to be called financial egotists. And a few of them sort of made the ride in the tumbrils to the guillotines. So I've always said the way to solve insider trading everything is to have a hanging in O'Connell Street once in a while. It would solve the problem pretty quickly, really.
Do we have a system of crony capitalism? I mean,
oh, Lawrence Summers used that term. He went to Asia and told the Asians, you know, you got crony capitalism. We've got a bigger set of cronies sitting around in Washington and in the UK.
So is it the same problems that Asia had before their financial crisis at the end of the 90s?
Well, it's different, for the structural problems are different, but the fundamental thing is you've got people of the same cloth, with the same background, the same education, who talk to each other. And basically, it's a little sort of monoculture, which actually doesn't see anything outside that. I mean, if you actually look at the way they see ordinary people, it's sort of like extras in a film shoot. They sort of fill in the background, have no dialogue. Yeah, you're just there, just keep doing it. We make more money, so we must be superior. And that link between what you get paid out of the moral hazard equates to basically the fact that they're superior. And that's a big problem, and it's very hard to change.
And isn't it the case that basically President Obama's economic advisors all come from that same class? They're all from the financial class.
Actually, I never understood that about Obama. When he came into power, he had a mandate of pretty large proportions. But he went almost to protect the Democrat franchise. He went and got exactly the same people with this tremendous amount of baggage. And I couldn't understand why he did that. And that's now coming home to roost. There's bigger problems there. But basically, he has a whole bunch of discredited people. And I just didn't understand why he did that. And I think it'll prove to be politically a very sad mistake in the end.
Is it a case that, you know, saying how they view everyone as extras, is it a case they've almost come to believe their own publicity in the cultural sort of sense, where they see Wall Street? I can remember when I was doing my economics degree back in the early 90s, I had people who were in my class who took pride in being able to recite the the greed is good speech from Wall Street. And, you know, we have the Masters of the Universe from Bonfire of the Vanities and all this sort of cultural sense of these guys actually are these masters of the universe. Is that a thing? It's not so much, there is the bonuses, but it's also that cultural thing where they believe that they're bulletproof, they believe they're higher.
Absolutely right. They're a very strange culture, actually, because not only do they believe it, but when they do something wrong, it's like a 2-year-old. It wasn't me. You know, it was somebody else's fault. They have this capacity to deflect blame. I mean, you had Lloyd Blankfield, who's the chairman of Goldman Sachs, actually at one point musing to the, I think it was the Daily Telegraph, that he was doing God's work. I wanted to know which God, Mammon?
What about, what's your read on big picture risk, looking at the Australian economy? I see the editor of The Economist is in town this week, and he's saying that he can't believe how grim everyone is about the economy, and, you know, this is just, it's nirvana compared to what he's seeing in Europe and the US. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think compared to where Europe is, I mean, Europe's about to go bankrupt, basically, and the US is going to be close behind, followed by Japan and followed by probably some other people. So relative to that, yes, but we've got 3 headwinds. The first headwind is a very simple one, which is China. China's 2 biggest trading partners are Europe and North America, who are financially distressed. So how they're going to keep growing is an interesting mystery. That's going to flow through into commodity prices. That's going to flow through into the volumes of our exports. That's the first problem. The second problem is, despite the fact that, as Glenn Stevens tells us, with ominous regularity, we have the best terms of trade, we get more for our exports than ever before, plus we're selling more overseas than ever before, we still have to borrow a massive sum of money overseas. And that's a huge problem for us, because as the money markets in the world, and they're very close to seizing up now, I mean, it's like a Kurt Vonnegut's novel, you know, you dropped a bit of iodine in the water and it's all going to freeze up at some stage. If that happens, the cost of our money, the availability of the amount of money is going to seize up. The last thing is I sort of got this thing on repeat now where the Wayne Swan and everybody says there's mining pipeline, you know, all that sort of stuff. The point is there is a pipeline, there's no doubt about it, but that investment will not occur unless there's demand for the product. And secondly, that pipeline still has to be financed. And we've got some little indigenous things like productivity doesn't improve in this country, we've got overinvestment in housing, we've got some own goals that we score. All of that points to some significant challenges, but let me put it this way. Between being in Athens and being in Sydney, no contest, no contest on that one. Yeah. Not a contest.
You mentioned the issue of growth in China. What about the environmental constraints on growth in China? Is that going to be a real issue?
Well, not for the Chinese. It will be for the rest of the world. I mean, everybody loves this
But what
idea.
I'm talking about is, you know, the water supplies, all those kind of issues that may end up restraining growth.
Look, it's going to restrain the world. We've come to a very interesting inflection point in the human race's existence. Number one, financialisation, which for the last 30 years, debt and speculation, which drove growth, that's coming to an end. Second thing, we've got finite resources like you're talking about with water and oil. And the last issue, I think, is effectively climate change, whether you're a believer or not. There's fundamental changes going on. Those 3 things are coming together. The stars are aligning in an extremely unpleasant way. And so I think China's problems, to some extent, are a subset of that. But the bigger problem is everybody wants China to drive the global economy. We all know if the average Chinese adopts the lifestyle of the United States, the environmental consequences of that are horrendous. And how do we remedy that?
So you delivered a paper back in 2006, which I think was called the Coming Credit Crash. And some people listened to you, a lot of people didn't listen to you. Has anyone learnt the lessons of that credit crash, and are we likely to go there again anytime soon?
The lesson of history always is that nobody learns the lessons of history. That's basically the only lesson I've ever learned. So I don't think anything fundamental has changed. Look, it was a case of we tried to do extend and pretend, patch things over. And the last 3 years, the tragedy is we've wasted 3 years. We've wasted an enormous sum of money, and we're pretty much back to where we were. And the conditions now, to me, look much more ferociously bad than they did in 2008. Because in 2008, when things went awry, the government was there. And I use the analogy of a car. You're driving along merrily, you have a prank, airbags go up, everything goes up, you're okay. Yeah, I've got a few bruises and sprains and so forth, but you do. This time, we're driving in the same car, there's no airbag, because the governments are tapped out. They don't have the capacity to do it very much. We've got a huge problem.
Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure.
And the book is called Extreme Money. That's all for The Drum. Thanks very much to the panel. Greg O'Mahony, Greg Jericho, and also Jessica Brown. You can check out columns, including Greg Jericho's latest, which is on the Drum website at abc.net.au/The Drum. And we'll see you the same time tomorrow night. Catch you then.